Okay, so the reason I'm sharing this Gemara in Brachos 7a and 7b talk about so many different ideas that our rabbis had, especially before and after the time of the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is famously one who went to hide in a cave for 12 plus 1 years in order to avoid the Romans finding him. So there's quite a few quotes from him, and I think that this is maybe the best one ever, which is G'dola Shimusha Asher Torah Yotamid Umudah, which means that it is greater to be with a Torah scholar and see the day-to-day questions and answers that this Torah scholar suggests and gives, much more than if you were just learning the Torah from the rabbi or from a book. And the proof, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is Po Elisha ben Shaphat. Here is Elisha ben Shaphat, the prophet, Asher Tzak Mayim El Eliyahu, that he poured the water on the hands of Elijah when he had the experiment, the deadly experiment on Mount Carmel. It doesn't say that he learned from Eliyahu, but rather that he poured the water on his hands, and that teaches us that Shimushag Yoter Milumudah. Until today, there's many rabbis who want to know, what your kind of background is and what kind of shimush did you do. I don't have too much personal experience. Um, I did learn from two rabbis in being with them, almost 24/7. But specifically in terms of what we're going to learn today, um, one of my rabbis in Chalvin taught us many different rulings of the Chazon Ish, which are related to the topic of using a tree or a plant on Shabbat. So, as a precaution, the sages prohibited using a tree on Shabbat out of concern that one may end up breaking off a branch or leaf or flower. Therefore, one may not climb or lean against a tree and may not place items on trees or remove these items from them. If the wind blows an item out of clothing into a tree on Shabbat, one may not remove it. Similarly, one may not recover a ball, soccer, or otherwise that fell or flew into a tree, nor shake the tree so that the ball or kite will fall out. One should take care not to place things on a tree before Shabbat if they will be needed on Shabbat. So when people used to travel and the traveling took weeks, basically asking people that when they camp to not use trees in the vicinity to put things there because you probably need them for Shabbat. And even though it's a good way, for example, in the northern sphere where it's icy almost year round, they used to hang fish to freeze them and preserve them from a tree. You are not allowed to do that on Friday because you're going to probably take it down on Shabbat to eat. However, one may touch a tree if he is not using or moving it. So there isn't a prohibition of touching a tree, and that reminds us a little bit of the midrash that says that when Chava, Eve, told the snake that she was not allowed to touch the tree, and that wasn't part of the original prohibition, and that she was wrong in that because they were allowed to touch the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but they were not allowed to eat from its fruit. So not only using a tree is prohibited, but it also prohibited to use items resting directly on a tree. For example, one may not use a swing that is attached to a tree, even if only one side is attached. One may not remove an item of clothing from a clothesline that is tied to a tree. Similarly, one may not climb a ladder that is resting directly against a tree, and one may not remove things from a basket hanging from a tree. However, if a peg was driven into a tree and a swing was hung from the peg or the clothesline, etc., one may use a swing. This is because only the peg is considered resting on the tree while the swing is resting on the peg. So it's what's called tzidei tzdadim. Since the swing is two steps removed from the tree. This was not included in the rabbinic prohibition. Similarly, one may remove an item of clothing from a clothesline that is tied to a peg stuck into a tree, because again, the clothesline is 2 steps removed from the tree, and when the rabbis made this fence, they did not make a double fence, what we call shvut the shvut, which I think we mentioned a couple of times before, but this really is very practical. If before Shabbat one rested a ladder against a peg embedded in a tree, one may climb the ladder on Shabbat because the ladder is 2 steps removed from the tree. We're not talking about danger to life, like from a wild animal or poisonous animal or enemy. It's just the idea of, resting on a tree, using maybe the tree house and this ladder. If before Shabbat items were placed in a basket hanging from a hook stuck in the tree, one may put items into it and remove them on Shabbat, because this too is 2 steps removed from the tree. However, on Shabbat, one may not rest the ladder against a peg or hang the basket on the hook, because that would be making use of an item resting directly on a tree, so there wouldn't be that 2 steps removal. So, in additional laws, there's quite a few very practical laws concerning plants on Shabbat. So, the sages' enactment against using trees applies to shrubs and vines, not only trees, solid trees that have hard branches or yield hard fruit, like pumpkins. However, the enactment does not include soft weeds, bushes, or branches, and therefore one may sit on a lawn on Shabbat, even if it moves the grass slightly, and even if maybe the grass will be cut in their walk. One may not smell an edible fruit while it is attached to its tree, like a lemon or a hedgehog or apple, lest one forget and end up plucking the fruit in order to eat it. However, one may smell fragrant flowers where they grow. This is because he has no reason to pick them, as they can be smelled while still attached to the ground. I would say that from what I learned from my rabbis, it's better if these flowers do not belong to you, because if they do belong to you, you're allowed, according to Halacha, to cut them on Shabbat. Well, I mean, you're allowed to cut them based on the fact that they are owned by you, but we're not allowed to cut them on Shabbat. So if the flowers belong to somebody else, you're allowed to bend down according to this explanation and smell the flowers. If tree branches themselves are fragrant, one may not grasp them and move them closer to smell them, because one may not move them, just as one may not move a tree. If the branches are soft and pliant, as are myrtle branches, one may grasp them and move them closer to smell them. One must, of course, be careful not to pluck the branches, because that would be 100% kotzer. One may walk on a lawn, like we said before, even though walking on it may uproot some grass. This is because he does not intend to do this, and it is not necessarily going to happen. It's not even a psik resha, it's just maybe a grama. But if the grass is high and is certain to walking on it will cause some of it to be torn up, one may not walk on it. Not only did the sages prohibit using a tree, they also prohibited riding on an animal, lest the rider break a branch to use as a riding crop or to direct the animal. And the sages also prohibited extracting honey from honeycombs, because this resembles picking produce and me'amer. One may bring his animals to the grassy area on Shabbat so that they may graze. This is not considered kotzer, because the animals are eating for themselves. You're not cutting the grass for them or the hay. We are not commanded to ensure that animals keep Shabbat. We simply must ensure that they do not perform melachot on our behalf. Last but not least, what I was talking about, shimusha, about learning from a rabbi who was able to be with another rabbi for so long. I'll tell the story first before we learn the actual halacha. When Chazon Ish, who was known to be what's called a machmir, or more stringent, said that if a flower pot or a plant pot, even if it doesn't have a hole, but it's resting on the ground, even if there's a intermediate block of wood or mixture of cement or any other kind, in Israel they call it balatot, which is basically a mixture of cement and broken or cut stones. That he claimed that there was still considered taking root from the ground, and nobody believed him because they said, that's a chumrah that our rabbis in the Talmud said is not true. It's only when there is an actual hole at the bottom of the flower pot. But after he died, for some reason they had to replace some of the floor in his apartment, and where there was a tree in a flower pot, even though there was no hole, they found a hole that was about a foot long below the tree. It was just hollow into the sand that's usually placed on these under these balatot. So that's why I said it was incredible, because he proved in death that his idea about a tzitz she'einonaku, of a flower pot that does not have a hole, is still connected somehow to the ground. So just as one may not break off a branch or leaf from a plant growing in soil, so too one may not break off anything from a potted plant. If the flower pot has holes in the bottom, like we just mentioned, it is considered connected to the ground. Thus, one who plucks anything from it transgresses kotzer by Torah law. If the flower pot does not have holes in the bottom, it is not considered connected to the ground, as this is not the way plants normally grow. Thus, one who plucks anything from it transgresses only in quotation marks rabbinically. Similarly, one may not water potted plants on Shabbat because of the idea of zorea. And last, one may not move a potted plant from its place on Shabbat because it is moktzeh. It is considered a klishe melachtul isur, growing something that is prohibited on Shabbat, since watering it its contents or picking them is prohibited. However, one may move it if he needs the space it occupies, like any other klishe melachtul isur. If the potted plant is frequently moved from place to place for aesthetic reasons, or so that it can be smelled, it is not muktzeh, since its primary use is a permissible one. So we went a little bit over our 10 minutes, and we'll stop here and we'll open up for questions.